Senator Tuesday Night Talks. Thank you for coming. For Audubon News, the next meeting for our Tuesday Night Talks won't be until January, but we're going to do a right?
Are you doing a Christmas bird count talk?
But the Christmas bird count will probably be the 13th.
Okay, yeah, the second day.
Right.
Yep.
Milo is on, they've hit land. They're in South America, Argentina, and I expect he will be back in town sometime after Thanksgiving. And then he'll give us the update on the bird identification review for the Christmas bird count, and then information about the Christmas bird count. I think almost everybody here has participated in the Christmas bird count. If you're not, if you don't have any information about that, if you'd like to join us, that works. But I'd like to introduce now our guest speaker, who is a friend of mine and the only other certified masterclass hummingbird bander on South Central Alaska, Todd ESKELIN, who works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the KENAI. And he's going to tell us about his work with Anna's hummingbirds here in Alaska. Go ahead, Todd.
Thank you, and thanks for the invite. I do love talking about hummingbirds, and tends to be one of my favorite topics, but I will say I'm kind of a rookie at this. Kate's been at it a lot longer, and it's just cool that we have at least a couple of people in Alaska that we can not only share ideas with, but occasionally share a few birds between us, and we've done that now with Anna's, but
Once.
one time. It's more coming, but I'll jump right into my talk. I started banding, gosh, in the 90s, early 90s, got my master banding permit in 91, I think. And over the course of time, I banded 30,000 songbirds, but I had never banded a hummingbird. Lots of maps projects. I was hired by Fish and Wildlife Service to go out and help other stations, other refuges set up map stations where they would be banding. And then I taught all the biologists how to band, but I couldn't ever land a Fish and Wildlife job myself. I just kept getting these little contracts. And eventually I landed back here on the Kenai where I grew up. And there weren't a lot of banding projects. So a lot of my banding work had been on my own time. But I still never had hummingbirds until recently. So I'm going to jump right into my PowerPoint, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for discussion. There's a spot in the middle of it where I expect a little discussion, and then lots of questions afterwards. So I'm going to try to keep it relatively brief and give you most of the time, because I think the engagement with the questions you guys come up with are actually more important than me just telling you how many birds I banded. So let me jump right here to my talk. Give me a second to get this into the right mode. Okay. So I'm sure you've heard a bunch of this information from Kate. The title of my talk was Anna's Hummingbirds, Where Are They Coming From and Where Are They Going? And it kind of originates from when I started thinking I wanted to get my hummingbird certification. We didn't have a lot of opportunities here on the Kenai, and I certainly didn't have a lot of opportunities here at the Kenai Refuge. So it was a far stretch eventually to get my boss to pay for an airline ticket down to get my certification. But I hope as we get further on, you'll see the value of it. Anna's was my initial focus, and part of that was we didn't have any rufous breeding here on the Western Kenai Peninsula, but we started seeing Anna's. The first time we thought, oh, there's an Anna's hummingbird in Seward. That's really cool. We all drove to Seward and looked at it and checked it on our list. and moved on. And then a few years later, there was another one. And then it started becoming an annual thing. And that was the point at which I thought, man, I really need to get my hummingbird certification so I can put a band on these guys and see if the same birds are making it to the Kenai and just kind of filtering around, or we're getting a new crop of birds every year. And that was just my initial push into it. I later realized the questions were way more complex, and the whole thing is blown up on me, and I'm doing a lot more and different things than I thought I was going to be doing. But Anna's hummingbirds, let me put my little, got these all kinds of fancy technology nowadays. So Anna's hummingbirds, adult males, which you'll probably get to see a few around Cordova, they have this whole head and throat gorge. Here's one in good light that's not in Alaska because we don't ever see our hummingbirds in the same light. And then you get a lot of these juveniles that are starting to grow their gorget in, and we'll have a varying array of different sparkles on them. But Annas are considered to be kind of a medium-sized, chunky hummingbird. Everything is small when you're dealing with hummingbirds, so it's hard to convince somebody this is a medium hummingbird. But the history of Annas, in the early 1900s, they were really confined to this Southern California, Baja area. They started moving, and by 1950, they had made it up to Northern California, and then they just kind of stalled there for a while. More recently, there was another push at post 1950. There was a push in the early 2000s that pushed them up into Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And also we're starting to see a little bit of push east. So we're pretty much, if you have a range map in your field guide, it's outdated. It's outdated every year. And so, this map was created by Cornell just a couple of years ago. And I would say now that it would be very justifiable to put this non-breeding scarce category all the way through the Kenai Peninsula. And breeding, probably there is scattered breeding, probably as far as Juneau. Which if you look at the latitudinal grades, we're not very far away from that. So just something to keep in mind with there. But that's kind of the history of how they've started moving. And so one of the other problems I ran into when I started looking for information on Annas is there's really not much out there as far as organized surveys and things because of when Annas are active and identifiable. So Christmas bird count tends to be one of our better sources of information. Breeding bird survey routes don't really hit them. And, one of the problems with breeding bird or with Christmas bird count data is they're always centered around one of our populated areas. That's where our participants are. We set up a point in the middle of this town and we do Christmas bird count in that area. So we don't really have a very effective way of, other than modeling through eBird and stuff, we don't have a very good effective way of determining how many Annas are really out there away from these Christmas bird count zones. But the cool thing is, when we look at the history of, we can look at Christmas bird count, we can look at the history of when we know Annas started moving, and we can see this period in about 2000 when they started ballooning into the Pacific Northwest. Now, I did try to update this graphic and go a little further, and it turned out, and I did actually go and do this on Christmas bird count, without requesting the data, you can only pull a certain amount of data. And so there's so many birds now showing up, I had to actually go through Oregon, Washington, BC, take all of the counts and then physically add up all of the ANAs in each count. And I was able to show, to update the data all the way to 2024. The cool thing is that we saw that climb, and then it kind of looks like it's starting to level out a little bit. So maybe we're reaching some kind of saturation point in these Christmas bird count zones. We always try to dig deep into these graphics and figure out what the heck's going on, and it's always a guess, but that's kind of what I see. The other cool thing in looking at the graphics, I pulled just the Washington one, and what I noticed in the Washington one was, in 2000, you started to see this slow, steady climb. In about 2010, you saw an increase in that rate. And this is pretty typical for bird populations that move into a new area. There's a critical mass that's required before there's enough of them that they start finding each other and they start breeding in earnest. And once they start breeding, then you start seeing that next level of growth. And so what I think you're seeing here, if I was to interpret, is you are seeing the increase of birds moving into Oregon, Washington, BC, in this case, Washington. Christmas bird count numbers slightly rise, and then there becomes this point at which they start breeding in earnest, and you start seeing the numbers skyrocket. And the point here is at about 2010 when we see that next jump, and not surprisingly, Alaska Christmas bird count numbers kind of dribble along, nothing 1, nothing 2. And then in about 2010, they became a permanent fixture in Alaska Christmas bird count data. And so I don't think it was quite that early that we started seeing them annually on the KENAI. But once we did, then I went and got my banding license, and I started banding in 2018. We can still see that a significant weather event can reduce that trend. And remember, this is Christmas bird count, so this is generally December and January when these birds are here. But September, October, the number of birds could be much higher, and that's what I'm finding with the banding. So now in the Pacific Northwest, when they get a cold snap, this was a friend of mine who lives a little bit south of Seattle, between Seattle and Tacoma on Puget Sound, and they had a cold snap. It wasn't really that cold by our standards, but it was cold, and her feeders just got filled, and she just kept putting up more feeders, and they would all fill up, and there was a mad dash that year to figure out how to keep feeders from freezing. But she became famous with this picture. I think Birds and Blooms actually asked her if they could publish it as well. Super nice lady. But backing up to my training, so my focus was ANAs. Pretty much everybody said the only hummingbirds you have to band in Alaska are rufous. So we chose an area where I would get maximum exposure to rufus, and ended up being the perfect trainer. The same mentor that many of us have had was Fred Bassett, and he exposed me to lots of different species. In Idaho at Rudine Ranch where we were at, we weren't able to catch ANAs at the time, but I did get my hands on quite a few rufus, and it was the perfect training to set me up to go and launch out on my own. Not expecting any of these other species, but just focusing mostly on ANAs. And then when I got to the KENAI, I got back to the Kenai with my banding permit in hand, I had to find birds. And uh, it turned out there was eBird. I control eBird, but there weren't a lot of other ways that birders were connecting. And so I set up a private Facebook group and I broadcast it out everywhere and asked people that were feeding hummingbirds or seeing hummingbirds to join. And it's been actually a really strong avenue where we've been able to use social media and connect to a lot of people that we're seeing birds here on the Kenai. Every time somebody has one, they're, all of their friends are like, "Have you joined the hummingbird group?" And so it's been a really good avenue for me to get access to birds. I would still say, even with my Facebook group and eBird, as I filter around the community and talk to people and make other connections, I'm probably hitting 25 to 30% of the birds that are showing up. I always hear about birds that were here last year, or somebody that had birds for 2 or 3 years in a row before all of our paths connect. So we're still missing a lot of opportunities to get birds banded, just because of our lack of connectivity. And partially maybe that's because we don't live in a smaller community like Cordova where everybody knows each other. We're almost a little too big here on the Kenai. So my initial goal when I started this was just simply to document when birds first successfully overwintered on the Kenai Peninsula. And I was going to do that through banding. I was going to put a band on a bunch of birds. And then in subsequent years, the expectation would be at some point I would catch one of my banded birds from a previous year. And voila, we were able to check the box that we know they had successfully overwintered. This whole thing has, like I said earlier, has blown up into something totally different than I was shooting for, but not necessarily in a bad way. So I started off chasing a couple of Annas around the Kenai, and now it's blown up into I now go to Portage to the Wildlife Conservation Center in the summertime and do summer hummingbird days. It's like a 2-day banding demonstration event. Down here in the bottom, we're in Girdwood doing bird trivia night at a local cafe, and fortunately banded a couple hummingbirds there. It's really been a unique opportunity for outreach. And as it grew, like, I will preface this with saying that I'm not even really a people person. I am your typical biologist. I want to sit out in the woods and count birds and band my birds and not really talk to anybody. And all of a sudden I got thrown into this mix. And over the course of a couple of years, I realized, man, I'm running around, I'm giving all these talks, and we can't say the CC word, but we say strange weather patterns now. And I'm going out and I'm talking to people about the recurring strange weather patterns that are now happening. And what I realized was, at least here in my community, I was going out and talking to guys who live in Nikiski. They have lived there for 50 years. They're, staunch oil field workers, support the cause. And we're sitting down at their dining room table having a cup of coffee. And they're like, I have never seen a hummingbird here, let alone seen one in October. What's going on? And it just ended up being an amazing segue to talk to people about climate change and show them that some of the impacts of climate change are actually going to be really cool things for us. There are a whole bunch of things that are going to be really bad, But if I start off the conversation with it's bad, 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 they shut down. And so um, I I can't tell you how many talks I've given where I was sitting there and there's 100 people at a bird talk, and honestly, if I was giving them a talk about any of the other 30 species that we've talked about, how much they've changed here on the Kenai, bird species that have disappeared, a lot of new species that have shown up. It's like I could be giving you a talk about red-breasted nuthatches, but I wouldn't have 100 people there, right? So it has been kind of a newfound thing where even though I just wanted to focus on Anna's, this was actually a really empowering and an important part of the research was the outreach. And so at AWCC, I have summer hummingbird days, but then I band there 6 or 7 times a summer, every 7 to 10 days. And this is just a typical day. I will have 25, 30 people watching. We've been able to use technology and set up an Elmo camera so people can watch on the screen beside me and see what's happening right up close and not have to all gather around real tight. But just really cool stuff have come out of it. And I'm appreciative I got drugged screaming away from my research and into this outreach component. So now with my newfound interest in Anna's, everybody is texting me videos and sending me updates when they see a hummingbird. And there's a lot of hummingbird sightings that are happening that I think were probably happening before, and we are missing getting that data in eBird and learning about what was here. So this friend of mine texted me the other day. She's like, "Oh, I finally got an Anna's," and you have to know this woman tried for 3 years. She planted every possible flower, and she researched. Boy, nasturtiums was going to be the latest ones, and she filled her deck and her yard with flowers, and she hung feeders, and it took her 2 years, I think. And finally, one fall in late September, she texted me and she was crying because she had an Anna's hummingbird, and I went and banded it, and her kids got to see it, and it was just an amazing experience. Fast forward, she then got another Anna's the next fall. The next fall, she got 2 more Anna's. And so this year she texted me and she's like, "I got an Anna's, time to come out and band." And she sent me this video. Let's see if I can get it to play. So boom, there's your cute little hummingbird coming to her porch feeder. And one thing that was cool about this was I went back and freeze framed. I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." She said, "It's not coming to the feeder yet, and I'll let you know when it comes to the feeder so we can come and band it." And I started freeze framing the video, and I'm like, "That's not an Anna's hummingbird." Huh, interesting. So September 26th. And if you look, so in each frame here, I'll circle the areas that I was focusing on just so you can see it. The flanks, the vent area, flanks under the wings, and then also the throat. You can see that, what I spotted in the video initially, I couldn't see all the colors showing up in the vent and underneath the wings, but I saw all that stippling on the throat. And I'm like, my gosh, I've never seen an Anna's look that way. And then it dawned on me that it was an immature male Rufus. And so it was just kind of cool. But, again, like one of the things that's happened since I started chasing Anna's is I banded Rufus in, I think, September and October now on the Kenai. I've banded 2 Costas on the Kenai now. And a lot of that information might have been retained in eBird, but we wouldn't have had some of the measurements and things off of the individual birds. So anyway, like I said, my goal was to go and chase Annas, and now I'm chasing everything that even looks like a hummingbird. So let's see, 2018, I got, and I will say, with Anna's, with Rufus, I have a much more dedicated time frame. I'm trying to sample a certain amount of time and make it comparable to each year. With Anna's, the goal is to catch every possible one I can and get a band on it, because each one is a ticket. It's a ticket in a lottery. And there's a Leopold quote about it, but it's a ticket in the lottery, and I never know which one may be the one that survives over the winter, and I catch it somewhere else the next fall. So I kind of view it as that the goal is to catch as many as I can, but mixed into all that time frame are bad roads, a knee replacement surgery, kids doing things, and so most of these, if it's Kenai Soldotna, I'm only 15-20 minutes away, but I've been up in Anchorage and banded Annas. I routinely will take a hour and a half drive down to Homer, and I'll try to line up 3 or 4 birds or 3 or 4 houses. And so this is just kind of a sampling of what I was able to kick out. I also think during COVID times, I was able to chase birds a little bit more because the work duties were lightened a little bit. So 2021 was a big year, 24 birds, and when you have a number like 17 banded in Homer, I can tell you there was double that on the Homer hillside. These are just the ones that I was able to catch up to. And so, we really don't have a good measure still of how many birds are trying to or disperse to the Kenai. But we do have a measure because I generally put about the same amount of effort in. This year, Cordova is a little hotter than normal, so I think you guys have 4 and we have 4. It's not a race, but I still want to beat you. There have been, but like this is a typical thing that impacts my numbers, right? So, I have 2 birds up in Indian. That's a 2-hour, 15-minute, 2.5-hour drive. And if I could have got up there during more decent roads, it would have been easy to take off and go do that. Now the roads are crappy, but the shutdown, really restricted my ability to go and do that. So I know I've already missed 2 birds in Indian, 1 in Girdwood, 1 in Seward, and there's at least 2 down in Homer right now that I'm hoping to go down and get. And then there's a bunch of other birds that showed up at people's houses and didn't ever come to a feeder. And those are birds that are cool to see and document, but we're not going to be able to catch them. The other thing to look at is, as with any pioneering species, it's always the young boys that do all the stupid stuff, right? So hatching year males, 47 of the 61 have been these young males dispersing to a new area, getting there, not finding any girls, whatever, and either not making it or heading back. But we are in more recent years. Early on, it was all young males, and then I started catching a few adult males, and you'll see now I'm starting to pick up a few females, both hatch year and adult females. So we're getting closer to connecting all the needed dots. But I think our climatic conditions are still just a little rough. But we don't know. They're capable of so much more. the one thing I have found is that you really can't underestimate how um, the survivability of Anna's is incredible. And I know the books all say down to -8 Fahrenheit, and in BC was the record, but I am seeing birds that are surviving in not just temperature conditions, but these deeper snow conditions and whatnot. And they're fat, and then they're 2 days later, they're just as fat. A week later, they're the same weight, or they've actually gained some weight. And it's really not feeder weight. They're collecting insects from all the spruce trees. That you can watch them go up into a spruce canopy and just float around in there and collect up all the dead spiders and flies and things that are frozen up in the canopy. So they're getting all their protein that way. But birds are. I had one woman who she called me. She was so distraught but so happy because I had banded 7 Anna's hummingbirds at this woman's house in Homer, and I missed one, so I know she had at least 8. And at one point, we had a cold snap, and she went outside, or her husband went outside, and underneath their carport was this Anna's hummingbird frozen to the ground. And she's like, oh, he says, oh, it didn't make it, whatever. He picked it up, ripped it out of the snow. It was actually literally frozen to the ground. He ripped it up, took it into her, held it out. It's like, oh, one of your hummingbirds died, And she's like, let me just put it in a shoebox and let me just see something. Because I remember Todd telling me about torpor. And by golly, in half an hour, that thing warmed up and started shivering. And then she went outside and opened the box, and it flew away. And what we had figured out was the poor bird had gone up and tried to roost up in her little open carport, and there wasn't anything to grab hold of. So he sat up on top of a little 4x4 beam and then went into torpor, which is like a little mini hibernation. And then the wind came up in the middle of the night and blew him off his little perch, and he ended up on the ground. But it all of a sudden kind of, like I've had people tell me, they're like, we think the Anna's hummingbirds they're sleeping underneath the snow. And I said, okay, they're not ptarmigan, but I'm going to go along this line for a little bit here. Was shoveling snow off the deck, and I took a big scoop, and Anna's hummingbird came flying out of the snow pile. And it all of a sudden dawned on me what happened was, just like this other bird, one of her birds went into torpor, probably on the feeder, fell down on the ground, and then it snowed about 8 inches over it. And when she was scooping the snow up, this thing, it didn't know where it was other than it was under the snow, and woke up. Anyway, the point is, these guys are incredibly tough. So never underestimate their ability to make it through the winter here in Alaska, and especially our milder winters. But with banding, my goal was to document surviving the winter in South Central Alaska, and I have yet to check that box. I have not captured a bird that I banded one year. I've never recaptured one the next year. They typically all move all around whatever community they're in. I haven't had any Anchorage birds show up down in Homer, but I'll have Homer birds move all over in Homer. So I'll have a bird in Homer move 3.5 miles to somebody else's house for a week, and then go back to the other house that it originally came from. And then we have one bird that made it from Soldotna to Cordova. But that wasn't one of my fall birds. That was a bird I captured in July. and it was just still moving around. And then it decided Cordova was going to be the cool place to hang out for the winter. So I still have an open box here. But what I wanted to do now is I started doing this at my last talk, and somebody came up with a couple of really cool theories. So what I'm seeing is Anna's hummingbirds showing up in September, October, November. They're surviving happily. Maybe they're moving around to different feeders, but they're generally, they make it through a couple of cold snaps, and I'll often recapture them and they're the same weight or even heavier than when I first captured them in September. And then they all disappear about mid-December. A handful will hang on till mid-January, and then they disappear even if the weather hasn't changed at all and the feeders haven't changed. So I just want to throw it out there. If people want to come up with a few ideas of why they think the Annas are generally disappearing around mid-December.
Well, I've been tracking them into February, and that's the time I usually lose track of them. And then I had that one that I was getting on the trail camera, and that was a young male, and he disappeared around March. And my idea was that, well, he just decided to go find himself some spring territory.
Simply. No new ideas out of this group. Okay. Couple of theories that have come up. I have speculated that they may be moving back towards their natal birth area. It seems far-fetched that they could make it all the way back there. We're going to assume for now that it's British Columbia because that's the closest area. But one thing that's happening in British Columbia is Anna's hummingbirds generally start nesting about mid-December. And they have documented that Annas are actually nesting multiple times before Rufous get back. When Rufous come, they are the bullies of the feeders, and Annas generally kind of stay away from the feeders then. But they've had individual female Annas nest 4 times consecutively in one winter in British Columbia. So that's why we're seeing this big pulse of Anna's hatching year birds dispersing here. Is possibly, one female is actually cranking out 8 babies in a given winter. But that starts in mid-December. So, one theory is they come and hang out and they're going to give it a go here and they never see any girls, and so they move on, and the hormones are telling them it's time, but they're not finding a mate, and so they maybe start moving back and returning towards where they came from. Obviously, the simple solution is the birds die, whether that's from temperature or lack of food resources. Or one of the cool theories that came out in my last talk was, wow, mid-December, we're really getting really close to solstice, and maybe there are not enough feeding hours in the day to keep the bird alive. I think it's a really cool idea, and I think we could probably get some modelers to actually, and a biometrician to look at energy, metabolic needs for a day. But I will also say that a couple of banders have told me that they're pretty sure that Annas have the ability to go into torpor for more than 24 hours because they're seeing birds that are surviving some of these winter storms that the conditions may last for like 2 or 3 days, and then the bird shows back up. And we were seeing that with KENAI birds. We had a bird that would disappear for 4 or 5 days during a really bad storm, and then he'd show up like nothing ever happened. He'd hang out for a few days, then he'd take another week walkabout. And so I think it is actually plausible that they could go into torpor for more than 1 day cycle. The other thing that shoots down some of these food and temperature related things is the birds are disappearing, but I'm catching them a week before they disappear, and they were healthy as could be, fat and happy, and the conditions never changed. The daylight one, that's a little interesting, but I would still expect to see if birds were running out of daylight and were being food limited because of feeding times, I would see birds getting lighter and lighter throughout the winter before they disappeared. And I'm just not seeing that. The birds are healthy, and then they are gone, disappeared. So fascinating thing that I would like to kind of sort out why I'm not catching any of my banded birds the second year. And then the other idea is that they're just moving to different areas, and without feeders, we can't detect them. I mean, they're just almost impossible to detect. The males will sing, and a lot of birders are able to find them that way. But you know, it's really a tough deal to systematically go somewhere and look for Annas without a feeder. So on the horizon, and this isn't out there for consumption quite yet, but cellular tracking technologies has created this blue morpho transmitter, and we're now able to start getting them on hummingbirds. I don't know if this technology is going to help us in the case with Annas, but I would like to try a few. The transmitter is not something that you can just have a handheld thing and go and locate it and find it. It's being detected on a little bit broader scale. So, but it is being detected by lots of other devices. So, we would find out that a bird was in Homer, and then we would find if it went through populated areas that a bird was moving, but we wouldn't be able to use it to go and pinpoint its exact location without a ton of extra money and listening nodes and things. But in the future, I would love to get a couple of transmitters on Annas and see if they start moving back towards British Columbia or whether they just spiral in place and disappear. And maybe it will probably open up a whole nother can of worms for me and other questions, but I will at least be able to check my box as to whether they are perishing in the Kenai Peninsula, and that's why I'm not recapturing any bands in subsequent years, or they're moving somewhere else. And that's my new question. So Banding Coalition for the Americas is the one that's really helping pioneer the installation of transmitters, and we're hoping that in the near future we'll be able to do this with Annas. And yeah, we'll see. But before I turn it over to questions, there's just a couple of questions that always come up in my talks is, should I feed hummingbirds in Alaska? And kind of along the same lines, will I keep them from migrating? Well, as far as we know, Annas are essentially non-migratory, but hummingbirds in general are not steered by hormones drive whether they're going to migrate or not. There are certainly birds that we've seen, mallards and probably bald eagles to a certain degree where copious amounts of food can kind of make them lazy and decide not to do what they should be doing. Not the case with hummingbirds, but I will say, so your feeding of hummingbirds is not going to keep them here. And I actually would encourage people to feed just from the standpoint of we won't detect them if they're not coming to your feeder. While we were starting this talk, you could have had 4 Anna's hummingbirds fly by the window outside, and you guys would not have known that any of them went by. And so for me as a researcher, feeders are really one of the only ways that we're going to detect that they have even made the try to come and overwinter here and disperse to the Kenai. So from that standpoint, I strongly encourage feeders. Um, but I have had people who get so attached to the bird and they take it to an extreme level to the point of wanting to take the bird in the house and wanting to fly the bird back to who knows where. Um, if it's going to cause you, like if it's internally going to cause you grief and you're going to lose sleep at night worrying about this bird, I would say you probably shouldn't put up a feeder. That it's just not a healthy place for you to be. But if you can simply enjoy them like you do the other birds that come to your other feeders, um, and it's wonderful for us to get the data that they're here and they stayed until whenever they didn't come anymore, and it's all really good information. As far as helping or hurting them, they're the only way you're going to hurt them is to feed them improperly. Um, the sugar water that they are consuming, at least from what I've seen, it's like Gatorade. It gives them the energy to go and catch more bugs. And people don't think about bugs in the wintertime, but I'm watching these annas are going up into our spruce canopies and just gleaning thousands of bugs. And then they zip down to the feeder and get another little shot of sugar water so that they can go and get more bugs. And a dietitian would tell you, there's absolutely no possible way for them to survive on sugar water alone. Obviously, they need the proteins and the amino acids and all the things that they're getting from the bugs. So, from that standpoint, if you stick to a 4-to-1 ratio, which is typically what the sweeter flowers have, there are plenty of flowers that have a sweeter ratio of sugar in their nectar than that. But hummingbirds choose those when they know they have a water source that they can go and dilute that with. And in the wintertime, we don't have a lot of water sources. So if you stick to the 4-to-1, you're not going to cause them to get dehydrated when they're in torpor, and you're really not doing any harm. The other part is keeping a clean feeder. And fortunately, we're talking September, October. It's probably 2 weeks between when you have to clean them. People often will recommend 1 week, but use small amounts of nectar, and then you're probably going to have to get a heated feeder like the one in the middle here, or make your own, which is relatively easy to do. This is made by, I think, Hummer's Heated Delights, and this is a salsa bowl with a hole drilled in the bottom and an 8-watt bulb glued inside and then stuck to the bottom of a regular old feeder. So you could get a 8-watt bulb, ordered from Home Depot and put it in a Tupperware container, and that would be enough heat to keep your nectar from freezing. But anyway, I think that's as much as I wanted to share. There's a bunch of other stuff, but I think I'll let it come up in questions. And yeah, I'm open for questions. If you want to donate for transmitters for the future, this is the link to Banding Coalition for the Americas, who has completed a really wonderful study in Idaho last year, and I'm hoping we can do something with Anna's in the near future.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, are the transmitters, are they gonna be picked up by the Modus towers?
Yeah, so the transmitters are, I can't remember. I haven't got the official training, but there's a Modus, Farah, I think is the other one that picks them up. And then if you get the enhanced version, there's some kind of blue compatible device option. Um, Basically, they're picked up, they're pinged anytime you're in a more populated area. So we're not hinging on just having Modus towers. That was one of the limiting factors when we thought about tracking migration south, was there's not that many Modus towers between here and the lower 48. And now we, with this technology, we're not going to get exact location, but we're going to get pings and be able to know generally where they went. So
Is it the same transmitter? There was just an article, I think, in New York Times about tagging monarch butterflies, and it was being picked up by Bluetooth
yep,
as they came down the
100%.
coast.
Yep,
Okay.
100%. It's the same transmitter. The problem we have right now is ideally transmitters, so far transmitter retaining on a glue-on version is anywhere from 1 day to 49 days, I think. So it depends on if the bird is molting. That's gonna be a bird that you're wasting your money on, right? It's likely to fall off fairly quickly if they're already in heavy molt. They are working on trying to design a flying harness. If you can actually imagine a flying harness for a hummingbird that doesn't impede any of its, activities. But they were able to develop that flying harness on larger hummingbirds down in Mexico, and they just haven't quite got it to fit right on smaller hummingbirds yet. So we're still restricted to a glue-on version. Um, but we right now we have a little numbered band that we hope somebody sees or another bander catches, of which there are only 3 banders in Alaska. So um, any little bit of information we gain would be better. But yeah, it is the same. It is, the difference is monarchs, you can breach the weight to transmitter ratio because they're insects, and we have very strict limitations on vertebrates for studying them, and with birds you can't go over 3%. We're not anywhere near that with these transmitters, but in order to get that next level, these are all solar powered with no battery, so they're only going to operate when there's enough light on them to cause them to activate. Where any other transmitters you have, there's some kind of battery that's keeping that transmitter going, and the battery is where the weight is, and there's no battery produced yet that could make a transmitter with a battery that you put on a hummingbird.
So, if I got this right, there's no nesting north of British Columbia.
No,
Yeah,
there's nesting up to at least Juneau. It probably gets sporadic, and it's not going to be annual as you get up into that next layer of latitudes. There's going to be some years that they're nesting, and there's going to be some years that they're not. But they're still pretty sparse in Sitka and Juneau, but they've definitely documented. Nobody's found a nest, but they've documented all the other precursors of seeing females collecting ash and having birds around year round. And I haven't ever found any birds that were gravid or anything like that on the Kenai Peninsula, but undoubtedly there's nesting up to at least Juneau.
Anything with the altitude? I've understood maybe that the annas go up to higher altitude when the when the bossy rufous start coming in. And then they come lower. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, 100%. That's, one of the cool things about being friends. I mean, there's only so many banders, right? So we're all friends with the folks at Rocky Point down in BC, and they end up catching quite a few Annas. They don't focus on Annas, but they do catch quite a few of them, and they'll have their banded birds move up the valleys and further inland and further up. And it's definitely a common thing they do down in Arizona and Southern California. They move up, but that could also be sheltering from heat, right? Like we don't know for sure what. We don't speak hummingbird quite yet. Probably AI will come out with that. But they do, in the southern part of their range, they've always moved up during the summer months. And then now we see it's more kind of up and inland in British Columbia from the handful of band returns that we're getting. But they do disappear. So definitely some truth to that.
Just to add to that, I did see one up on Sheridan Mountain Trail in July, like a female.
Yeah, I've gotten several reports from people hiking up on the ridges and, fall bird hunters spotting Annas up there.
Yeah, this one was about in July. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Looks good for an Anna steamer.
And it's loaded with alpine flowers up there.
Yeah, and if you look at eBird, I think the problem is just detection, because if you look at eBird, there's I don't know, 10 or 15 Anna sightings on the Kenai in the summertime. I think I've banded 3 or 4 out of those 60 in June or July months. It's not very common, but they don't come to feeders that much, right? And so it's certainly possible that these birds disperse here, being born in January, February, March in British Columbia, getting here in April or May, and then not, I guess probably a little bit later because of the snow loads, obviously, but I think a lot of these birds are here, in June and July, and they're not detected because they're not coming to feeders until vegetation and flowers and things start senescing in, mid to end of September, and then they really start showing up in earnest, but they probably were here already.
Do you see rufous up in altitude very much? Or no?
My knees won't let me climb to altitude anymore.
We end up seeing a lot of rufous in altitude during migration, and so like my main rufous banding spot at AWCC in Portage, I really don't catch that many juveniles. I think this year, out of say 150 birds, maybe I catch 20 hatching year birds. They typically hatch and instinctually go up into the alpine. And so folks that are hiking up there, even people just hiking down on the Kenai, will see rufous actually fairly frequently in that mid to end of July range, when they're all leaving Kachemak Bay and whatnot, and they're filtering their way through. But a lot of people will see them up in the alpine. They'll have a red jacket on, and they'll come buzzing up to them and zoom around them and then take off,
No more questions? Todd, thank you so much for sharing your Anna's with us.
I'm still waiting for you to send one of your bandit birds my way now.
I've been trying. So he's like trying to compete with me with Anna's, right? And he's on the road system and he can go places. I'm stuck in Cordova.
No, but he's It's a much larger area.
Exactly. So
Like,
of
it's
course he's going to get more birds than I. But that's a question I'm asked is like, do you have more birds than we do here in Cordova? And I just on the offhand want to say yes, for the simple fact that most of our weather in the coastal here can be right on the edge of freezing thaw. It's blowing sideways. It's wet. It's cold. It's freezing. It's snow. And you, for the most part, live in a drier, cold climate, which is easier for them to deal with, even though the temperatures are significantly lower than it is here where the weather and the climate is so much more volatile. So I think that's
I would love to like agree with you 100%, but I also look at the other places where they're at, and you know, Puget Sound and British Columbia and Southeast Alaska, they're wet and cold as a dog, you know, and these guys love it there. If you look at the Christmas bird count data, British Columbia has higher numbers than Oregon and Washington. So there is some happy zone there, but that happy zone is freaking wet and cold, you know. I think structurally, like, or geographically, I could see more of them ending up in Homer because it's kind of the end of the peninsula, so to speak. And so I could see them bypassing Cordova. But I think if they found a feeder, I think they'd stay. So I mean, obviously all the birds that came here past Cordova to get here. I don't think they're flying over the Gulf, but it could be. They're amazing little birds. But it's probably just the density of feeders in general. Like if you had more feeders, you probably would get more birds.
yes. On that note, I've caught 4 birds since October. I caught 3 immature males at the beginning of October up just above the elementary school on Upper Fort. And then I just caught an adult male down on Railroad Avenue a week ago. And I'm heard of at least one more bird, which may or may not be one of these other birds, that is over by the Coast Guard facility. So I'm going to try to go stalk that bird the next good weather event I have. Nancy's had and Anna's coming to her house.
Sometimes too.
Yeah, and she's not seeing a white dot on its head. So maybe that
good view.
Right. So what is amazing is that all that area is within what, a half a mile? And we have this handful of birds, you know, in this small area within Cordova. I haven't talked to Trey lately out where I usually band at Diane Weiss's at EF on 6 Mile. She usually has Anna's, and Trey lives real close by. They kind of share a bird. I've not heard anything from them about any birds being out there this fall, which I find kind of unusual, but maybe they decided that Cordova has got a better spot going on in town. So
One thing that's really cool. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just trying to figure out when, I pulled my hummingbird feeders at the end of September, going out, not going to attract anything.
well, you could have an answer.
Line up until October.
You know, I tell everybody, like, I'm not going to tell you this is going to work. I have had a feeder at my house for 4 winters in a row, and I've not seen a damn thing. But my neighbor, a half mile away, she watched one of these talks. She went down to Save You More and bought a $2 hummingbird feeder, went and stuck it up, and a week later she had a female Anna's that I went and banded a half a mile from my house, you know. And one of the things that you do see about the distribution of places that I catch is there always seems to be a water source. The Kenai River, probably because of the aquatic insects that have come off and are now in, loaded and stored in all those trees. Proximity to the Kenai River within a half mile seems to be, Cooper Landing, Sterling, Soldotna, Kenai. They all, of course, there's not too many places, I guess, that aren't within a half a mile of water in Alaska, but
Good point. Is there any
the-
questions online we forgot to ask? Anybody watching online have any questions? Gotta turn your mic on. Okay, I think that's a no. No. Anything else for Todd?
Or turn their mic on and then off.
Oh, there's
Go
a
ahead,
mic
Mom.
off.
We were just talking about Valdez and how are we, do you know if we're, I haven't noticed hummingbirds in the winter, but are they here in Valdez, do you think?
Yeah, actually, Valdez is kind of a cool story right now because there is a Costas hummingbird in Valdez. A woman reached out to me just maybe about a week ago and said, "Hey, I got this hummingbird. Should I do something?" And I said, "Yeah, enjoy it. Keep your feeder up. Don't do anything crazy and put it inside your house." But she did try to. We assumed it was an Anna's, and then she sent me some pictures, and I'm like, "Boy, that's a terrible picture," but I feel like that's a Costas. And eventually she got some better pictures, and she does have a Costas. And that's the second one that I know of in the last few years, because wasn't there another one, Kate, a couple of years ago? Remember that woman had a hummingbird in Valdez and we couldn't quite identify it. It was too young and hadn't developed. And then come about February or March, it started molting and you could see these beautiful purple gorget feathers coming in, and it was a Costa. So
Identifying a hummingbird from photographs, especially if it's an immature bird, is almost impossible, even with the best of in focus, because there's so many little details you have to look at. So that's, we would love to get our hands on the bird physically, but neither one of us had project money to go to Valdez. Yeah. So keep on trying to get those first ones. Yeah.
the beautiful Costas I banded in Girdwood last year stuck around. I think it was end of October when I caught that one, and it was about December 10th, I think, was the last time they saw it come to the feeder. So stuck around for quite a while after being banded.
And we don't necessarily think that Costas are trying to do a range expansion into South Central Alaska. It just seems like every once in a while, a Costas just decides to take an Alaskan adventure and shows up.
I think this would be number 19 for Alaska records, the one in Valdez. It's somebody had looked it up and they said the one that I banded in Girdwood was number 18. So I think the Valdez bird would be. So, it's a very rare bird, but it won't be the last one we see in South Central Alaska either.
It's true. All right. Thanks, Todd. We'll let you get to your dinner.
You bet.
We'll talk
Have a
soon.
good night. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Before we go for the night, I just want to remind you that Thursday night, day after tomorrow, is going to be the EAC Weir replacement project update with the Copper Red River Watershed Project here at